Hi, everybody. So I just talked on the computer. Okay.
Talk to the computer and tell people when it's the next slide forward. Little. Last name is Little.
So I borrowed this image from this tweet I saw just last week from the United Nations Economic Commission announcing their collaboration with the Building Energy Exchange in New York City. And I was like, oh, that's so cool. We're seeing more of that happen. That actually has a lot to do with what I proposed to Sean to present on. And he said, no, let's stick with valuation, Debra. So he wants me to help you understand a little bit better about how the appraisal approach for high performance homes. Let's see. Okay, so this is a next slide. Click. House in Redding, California. Mike built this for his daughter. It's a zero net energy home, super high performing home. They just finished up their 12th month, first year of living in the house. 2,400 square foot house, you know, in Redding where it's 100, 110 often, cooled by a 3/4 ton heat pump. And the total heating costs for the year were about $20. So the problem is when they went for financing the son-in-law and daughter, they were hit with the same problem. It's way too common with so many people. The appraiser didn't recognize any added value for the performance assets or the solar. So next slide. This is Brian and Kathy, same problem, deep energy upgrade, save about 56% energy savings, and they added solar, so now they're zero net energy. They also have a lot of health benefits, but again, the appraiser recognized no added value for the performance assets. Click. Here's Dave and Carol. They were shopping for a home. They finally found one. It needed upgrades. They wanted to include energy upgrades. And their contractor used Ajo, the data tool that I developed, to describe the improvements to convince the bank to approve the loan. So they were able to do a deep energy upgrade before they moved in, which gave them a healthier, more comfortable house that cost less from day one. So their dreams came true. Click. So thousands of homeowners and property owners and contractors are investing in home performance across the country, only to be frustrated by real estate professionals not recognizing value for the performance assets. And it's true that real estate pros need training. Still, a very low percentage of them have any level of training on understanding high performance. There's not a whole lot of training that's adequate and accessible to them, but that's true, but we have yet to provide them with much data. If they had some data to help them understand the improvements and their benefits to the house and to the occupants, a lot of them can figure it out. So there's a lot that we can do to help with this process. Next slide. So the approaches to valuation in commercial building and homes are really quite different. Commercial buildings is all about financial calculations, net operating costs and profits are really the main metrics. With single family, we're dealing with a general population that's not always particularly economically rational, and appraisers are expected to sort of explain that. Click next slide. So the quality and quantity of data is really vital to both commercial appraising and residential. So we've got energy consumption that explains, yes, this house is saving energy now with these upgrades, but that doesn't answer the all-important question of why. We also need to understand why this house is saving energy. What's the actual scope of work? And it's really important for appraisers and real estate folks to understand that as well. Click. So why is evaluation important to us here today? Are very interested in decarbonizing our buildings. Right now, it's a market barrier. The homeowners really deserve the certainty that their investments will pay off, but right now they don't really have it. Click. So keeping our eyes on the goal of driving, really it's all about driving homeowners' actions to encourage them to energy upgrade their homes. So we have the messengers that are in contact with the homeowners, might be the contractors or a program, and so the homeowners take action, energy upgrade their home. We need the real estate agents and appraisers to then affirm those actions and report those out so that this data might be able to to be more discoverable. So the contractors and the real estate folks can help with making data more highly visible and accessible for others that can help drive demand to be able to use it, to make the data more usable. Click, next slide. So really data is all about managing risk. The more data, the more confidence, the more success stories and examples we have of high performance homes that are and their resulting measured performance, then the more information that we can have to lead others to see more of these homes and bring this all to scale, energy upgrade more homes. So next slide. What's the difference? This is the one of the main questions that appraisers need to answer. So we have this house, deep energy upgrades. What's the difference between the before and after conditions? Next slide. By the way, this is a real audience engaged session, at least physically with your fingers. We're flipping through a lot of slides really quite quickly. So the next slide is, yeah, this house is deep energy upgrades, but from the outside, it looks exactly the same, you know, we can't really tell. And if the appraiser was to walk through it and do an inspection, on the inside, there's probably not much difference they could see because everything's behind the walls, right? So it really helps if they have some documentation that they can base their information on and help them understand what actually was done to this house. Documentation is really, really key, and this kind of data is not, it's really difficult to get from the homeowners. So next slide. Same problem with new code build houses compared to high performance. It's really hard to tell unless we have the documentation. Next slide. So how do high performance assets contribute to market value? With both energy efficiency and renewables, they both reduce consumption, operating costs, produces a number, energy savings number that the appraisers can work with, do some financial calculations, figure out the present value, and then we have all the other beyond energy benefits that appraisers also should be able to recognize some added value there. Durability, quality, aesthetics, all should be something they can use. It's more difficult to monetize health and quality, but the more data we have, and we're starting to gather more and more data in the health area, then we should be able to build a case on that as well. So next slide. Zeroing in on solar, just as an example to kind of look at what kind of data do we need on a solar PV system. It's really, really quite simple, and you'd think it wouldn't be that hard to get from the homeowners. So the first thing, we're going to have location, we're going to know where the house is. So the next question will be ownership. How difficult do you think it might be for the homeowners to answer, is this system owned or leased? It's really, really dumbfoundingly often that they can't answer this question correctly. So over 50% of solar installs the last 4 or 5 years in California are lease systems. In some sections, it's 80% are leased. Lease systems do not contribute to property value. They aren't under the definition of real estate property rights. So they're a separate fixture. So we need to verify the ownership. And I taught my solar class in Santa Cruz just a couple weeks ago, and the appraiser that attended the class called me the next day and said, yeah, I inspected this house in Salinas, and the owner was saying, yeah, he's just buying the system just now, buying it. He said, yeah, it's owned, and he gave him the contract, and right on the top it said power purchase agreement, and in the fine print it gave them a couple options to buy. It spelled it out right there, so the guy hadn't really understood what the contract he was selling. It wasn't hidden, but also he's just confused. The salesman probably could have done a better job. And a lot of the lease systems have, the homeowners are just really confused. So they'll say they're owned when they're leased, and if the appraiser doesn't have the proof, it can really mess up the whole valuation and data that's reported out there. So regarding the system, any question that we're going to ask about the system is all about answering the production question. What does the system produce? Size, age, and such. So next slide. There are 3 basic approaches to value that appraisers are asked to consider for every single assignment. When it comes to mortgage appraisals, the banks always want comparables. We aren't actually required to always do comparables or proof through the market, but it's the banks that always sort of demand that. So we have a market approach where we need to find comparables. based on, you know, similar sales of similar homes should be an indicator of what the subject house should sell for. Then we have the cost approach and income capitalization, which is representing the future. What's the value today at a discounted rate of a future stream of income, which is applicable for rental properties. You have an accessory dwelling unit getting income. And it's totally applicable for solar. It makes so much sense. But the banks don't always think that it makes that much sense. So it makes sense. We're going to start there. Look at that. Next slide. Present value. So this is what we're using for the income capitalization approach. We want to do a present value calculation, and there's this tool, pvvalue.com, that you can all use. The Sandia Labs developed it. It's free for anyone to use, and they developed it especially for appraisers. So it's a very handy tool. It plugs in some of the local utility rates and some defaults. So here we have, back to the Reading house, Mike's house, a 5.3 kilowatt system. In Reading, that system is going to produce, according to the PV watts, which actually is pretty, I think that it actually, so PV watts says it's going to produce 7,179, and it actually produces about 7,300, so it's pretty close. Because we just now have the full year's amount of data from this house. So at the Reading electric utility rates, which are now 15.6 cents a kilowatt hour, the present value today total at 1 year old is $17,600. So that's like an actual amount that the appraisers could take and say, the solar system contributes $17,000 to the value of this house. That's one number that they could use of three numbers that we kind of want to look for. Then I just, for some interest, I took the same system and ran it through for the Arcata location. So it's going to produce a different amount of power. In Arcata, the same system would produce 4945 kilowatt hours. And at the same electric rates of 15.6, that present value would calc out to 12,300. And at the Arcata Redwood Coastal Energy Authority's rates of 17 cents, if I understood their website correctly, that present value would be 13,500. So the rate, you can, in PG&E territory, the base rate now I think is 21 cents. So the higher the rates, the more that's going to impact the present value number is going to be higher. And of course, if anyone's in the higher tiered rates, up to 49 cents, I think, kilowatt hour now, then the present value for them and the payback is going to be faster. So all these numbers sort of impact value to the individual house. No, I'm going to hold off of it. Maybe, I think we're going to have time though. Okay, so let's click on two more slides. I'm going to skip the next two. We're going to go straight to the Reading house actual numbers I have for net. We're looking at the second approach. We looked at the income approach. Now we're looking at cost approach. So the gross cost, actual cost, these guys paid $4 a watt. So it's $21,280. Then they got a 50-cent rebate from the electric company there in Reading. And they took advantage of the 30% tax rate. So their actual net cost was $13,264. Next slide. Let's look at the sales comparison approach. And it's the cost approach, just to say the rebates, the cost, the decreasing cost of panels, any incentives, they all kind of can complicate the cost approach more than typical. So the sales comparison approach number 3, with the big sub development there. I hope you guys are on the right slide now. It would be easier if all of our neighborhoods look like this, but they typically don't. Next slide. Just want to show you this. What I think is super powerful visual illustration of market activity. This is the SMUD territory residential solar installs. And anyone who looks at this image, including an underwriter, can deny that homeowners here are buying solar, right? There's some action happening here. Now, if an appraiser looked in the same area for an MLS listing, looking for homes that have sold in that same area with solar, they're likely to find something like this, really scarce data. And that's because not all those homes have sold, so they aren't going to be reported, but the agents are not reporting the data very accurately or consistently. Next slide. this is kind of what the data that appraisers are left to work with. So next slide, if agents don't report the data, the appraisers and the lenders kind of come to the conclusion that there's no market activity happening. It's not discoverable if nobody reports it. Next slide. So the task of determining an appraisal is to determine the market value, right? The definition of market value refers that buyers and sellers be willing, able, and knowledgeable. The buyers and sellers must be informed. But if we're depending on uninformed agents that are resistant to becoming informed, reporting or maybe guiding homeowners and then not reporting their actions very accurately, do we really have market value? Do we ever meet this definition of market value? Really having an impact on what we're able to see in the market when the data is not reported correctly. Next slide. So I just taught the solar class in Fresno early June, and I started talking to the Fresno Association of Realtors a few months before. I said, hey, I want to bring the class to the area. Do you want to collaborate? Do you want to let your members know about the class or host it? No, we're not really interested. And so I talked to them on and off, try to get them interested. I did call a lot of the individual offices, and they were saying, yeah, we're interested. But the board of the association said no. I got a ton of attendance from appraisers, though, so good for them. So the week before the class, this was the headlines in Fresno Bee. Fresno has the second most in the city in the country per capita solar. And I sent it to the board of realtors. I said, hey, it's not too late. We're having the class next week. Do you want to let you folks know? Next slide. They stood with their earlier, this is an actual email from her, from the director of education. No, it's not really, maybe it's interesting to the appraisers, but we're not really interested at this time. So this is like really this is like so challenging. It's really tough. So next slide. Couple examples of where the sales comparison approach can work, and I gotta get sticking here. If you have a development of newer homes, and these guys were built, they have several of these in Sacramento area and probably many areas. So built in mid-2000s, now they're going in there, and part of them, maybe all of them were included solar. Now they're going through their resale cycle. So in 2015, 20 of them sold. And we took a look at them. The homes with solar sold in a range of 300, 350, or 330, I'm sorry, and the ones without solar sold between 290, 320. So we could see that the solar premium was about 10,000 for those. That's one example of finding some data in the market. Next slide. Another real example from an appraiser down in LA. And the MLS, there's a lot I could say about the MLS systems. There's a lot of work to do there, but they are improving, and so now the appraisers or agents are starting to report some more information and ownership. Are these systems owned or leased? They're starting to report. So this was a house with a 7K system, 2,000 square foot house. He found some comparables and found some with solar, narrowed it down to 12 with solar, and he narrowed that further down to 8 that were owned instead of leased. Then he did an aerial view. Google Earth was something appraisers do to count the panels on the roof. Even though they know not all panels are the same, productivity and such, they screened out the outliers, and he got down. He narrowed those down to 6 homes that he could use. Next slide. The homes with solar sold for an average 135, without 129. So that gave a $6 difference per square foot times 2,000 square feet. Gave it about a $12,000 premium for those, which is what we call a market-derived premium. So that's another numbers. Next slide. So now we're going to get back to Mike's house. We knew the present value calculation for his system was 17.6. The actual cost was 13,264. The market, insufficient data. We know that because the appraiser totally couldn't find anything. Put it nicely. He was like, I think, not worse than lazy, but anyway. Next slide. So it's our contractors that are creating this data, and when we ask them, hey, give us our data, spend some time giving us your data. You know, we can't expect them to spend any more time than they have already. I'm totally going to nail it. I'm good. we need to make this easy for those that are creating the data as well as those that are going to be using it. Next slide. There's some real exceptional home performance experts that are going extra mile in collecting data. This is Mike's actual, he's probably got several data loggers in every room of that house, really monitoring, and he's, you know, an exception, but there are many of those, and he's really pursuing excellence. Next slide. But many more home performance contractors are, you know, more like Tom, to where he doesn't know Excel, he doesn't really want to take time to learn it, but if he had a tool that made it fast and easy for him, he would love to be able to collect more data and manage his data better. Next slide. So Ajo is a data tool that I developed as part of the solution. This slide is not to convey the details of the report, but just to say that the concept of, you know, if we can say it in one page, let's do. This is a deep energy upgrade. A house saved energy, 85% energy, and pretty much everything can be summarized in this one page of both the pre and post columns to make it really visible and really easy to understand. The house was like this and now it's like this. What are the improvements? What are the benefits? Next slide. This is an example of, Ajo also will produce a short solar report that's just half a page. It doesn't even need to have this much information. It just has the location, the ownership, the size, and the age. The appraisers can take that and use that basic information. And then they'll have some data to work with. Next slide. So we're talking about home performance data. Why rattle along in an old jalopy when we could hop on the bullet train and get anywhere we want 100 times faster for less cost? Next slide. And I just have to have at least one slide where I mention HPXML because it's just really a game changer for home performance. HP for home performance. It's a data standard and exchange protocol developed by a nationwide working group. So if now we have the capacity to take home performance data, build the infrastructure, and to capacity we've never really had before. And it's really important for many aspects of, many users of home performance data. Next slide. So last spring, just a couple months ago, I was hiking down on the Central Coast, went up over a ridge. I could look way out. Next slide. Diablo Canyon Nuclear Power Facility. So this, due to energy efficiency, California's now phasing out its last nuclear power plant. And so energy efficiency, you know, is really gaining position as a low-cost, low-risk, reliable source of energy. And standardization of data and exchange of that, more accessibility to it is very key to this process. Next slide. I'm just going to leave you with my last word. I really think that disclosure needs to be mandated. We can't wait around for it to be market-driven. The real estate attorneys are going to fight it all along the way. The planet doesn't have long enough for us to wait. If we just mandate some basic disclosure of operation costs, it's just like we have a nutrition label for our food. You know, we need to have some basic information always be made available at the time of sale at least. Next slide. It's just, I'm going to leave you with 2 examples of where this is working in the United States. So Chicago a couple years ago mandated that energy operating costs, I'm done, at the time of sale, it was the buyers needed to be told what the operating costs, and there was an option for them to list it in the MLS or not. So those that did disclose the operating costs in the MLS, all those houses sold faster, and whether or not they were energy hogs or energy efficient. So the homeowners really liked that certainty of knowing, you know, what they were getting. The next example is Portland has mandated home energy score, which I won't go into what it is, but it's disclosure. What two metrics it gives is the energy cost and the carbon footprint. And so they went from 0 to 3,000 energy scores in 3 months. So all those homeowners, all their listing agents, all the shoppers, and all their buying agents, at least all those people in just a couple years, they did math. It's going to be 1 million people that are at least asking the question, how much energy does this home use, and what's the carbon of this? This is conversations that are taking place that never would have taken place before. And I've asked, like, a whole room of home performance contractors, what do you guys know what your household consumption is on an annual basis? And no hands. A lot of people just don't even know that. So everybody should this is going to go a long way just to have change the mindset of people just being aware and start asking the question before they buy or lease or rent a home, what are the energy costs and what is the carbon footprint? So data is important. And the last slide is just that we need to also make this data very visible and accessible and start populating these maps of homes within high performance homes and solar.
Yay!